Welcome, everyone, to the Davis Creative Author Brand Connection. We'll be speaking today with Nadine Kouba, an executive and business leader coach. But before we welcome Nadine, I wanted to remind everyone of a few logistical details. So the call is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording within the next 24 hours. Please find your chat button on your screen. Usually, if you run your mouse over the bottom of the big black box, it'll pop up. That will allow you to type in questions into the chat box. And we promise to end the call around 12:15-ish so everyone can get back to the business of the day. So I originally met Nadine through the local chapter of the International Coaching, is it Coaches or Coaching Federation?
It is moving to coaching. The name is changing, I
It's
believe,
coaching.
officially
Okay,
in
see, I guess
2020.
intuitively I knew that, yeah. And Nadine founded Kouba Coaching in 2017 after retiring from the corporate world. As a trained and certified executive and business leader coach, Nadine brings extensive business expertise spanning 7 different industries: education, government, and not-for-profit. Dr. Kouba brings a powerful mix of strategy, empathy, and real-world insights to her client engagements, where she works with her clients to increase their effectiveness and accelerate their business. One of the challenges her clients frequently face is moving beyond fear or getting unstuck from old habits so they can embrace a new goal or challenge. She enjoys working with her clients to face the unknown and move towards success. One of the things I found out about Nadine recently also is that she's a former high school English teacher. So I feel she brings a unique perspective to our call today, because not only does she have that English background and that writing skill background, but she's able to bring to the table the ability to talk with authors and understand that idea of how to struggle with and start or finish whatever it is that we're writing. Nadine was also a contributing author in the 2019 anthology Living Well, which Davis Creative sponsored. So no matter where you are in your world, whether you're writing for corporate or you're an independent, or you have independent clients, or you're writing for yourself, confidence can sometimes be a stumbling block. So thank you, Nadine, for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Is confidence just another word for self-doubt? How do those two interplay?
That's an interesting question. I think if we think about confidence, it means we believe we are capable of taking on a task or an activity, or perhaps we have confidence because we've successfully done something already and we know that we can accomplish it because we've done it. We have success to build on. Or it could be we know we have the knowledge and skills for whatever that upcoming task might be, and we're willing to address it. Or perhaps, and this is where some of us need to get to when it comes to writing, if you've not put pen to paper before, is that we're explorers, that we're willing to give something a try. And we have enough confidence to say, I'm going to give it a try. It's an experiment. Let's see where we go. I think when we look at self-doubt, the definition is really in the word. It's us doubting ourselves. We all have that little voice in the back of our head, and it's asking us things like, am I really good enough? Do I know enough? Do I really have the skills to do this? And it's us talking to ourselves. We're questioning our own abilities and capabilities to succeed at attaining that goal that we want. So sometimes you have to think about that little voice in your head and tell it to shut up.
Right. I stumbled across an article this morning that I shared on LinkedIn and on Facebook, and it was a writers community, and I believe they're out of New York originally, that was established by parents who really want to be writers. And so it's, perhaps a stay-at-home mom with a newborn baby. And I thought, well, perhaps there are other people, perhaps it's not always just a baby that might keep us from being able to write or sit down and do what we need to do. Perhaps we're also taking care of an elderly parent, or we have a full-time job, or we have an array of things. Life gets in the way. And so how do I know if I'm using that outside thing, be it a child or a job or whatever, as my excuse for not being able to write? Or am I merely just perhaps using that as a way to, what's the word, reinterpret my lack of confidence?
I think there's a couple things you can check. One is, what are you saying to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
If there's self-doubt there, what are some of those little messages you're sending yourself? Unfortunately, research shows that out of all the messages we send ourselves, that 9 out of 10 of them are negative. So we're sending ourselves self-doubt messages or questions 9 out of every 10 times. And I know I'm guilty of that. Like, I'll do something and I might say, that's stupid. And honestly, I have to work on it with myself to actually rewind and go, no, that wasn't stupid. I made a poor decision.
Right.
And I personally practice controlling my own self-talk, because I'm highly judgmental and I have high standards and I don't meet them all the time.
Right.
So I have to check that. I think your question, though, is, let's take an honest look at what's going on in your life. If you are taking care of an ill child or an elderly parent, or you yourself have some issues going on, we all do only have so much time and energy. So I think it's being realistic about, where do I need to spend my time? How much energy do I have? And once you do an honest reflection, is to say, like, if I want to write something, is maybe just start doing some of the mental work, which is really, what is it I think I want to say? Who's my audience?
Mm-hmm.
I know when I was going to write my chapter, I knew it was more, the book was going to be aimed more for women, but I also knew that if I was going to talk about neuroscience and stress and compromised decision making, I didn't want to sound like an educator in the sense of teaching people something, standing up at a podium and doing that. I wanted to do it in a very conversational way. Like if I was sitting down and having coffee with a friend and talking about it, how would it sound versus, okay, she's got a PhD after her name. Is that Dr. Kouba now going to lecture us on parts of the brain and what it does?
Right.
So I think there's some honest conversations we have to have with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and look at it and then give ourselves some grace. If you're going through a bad time, maybe just when you have a little break over a cup of coffee, maybe you just think about making little bits of progress towards, what are those messages I want to talk about?
I know
John?
one of the phrases that came up in my brain as you were talking was the ability to feel that it's okay to give myself permission to make myself a priority, or make what I want a priority. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where self-care becomes very important too.
Mm-hmm.
In my practice, I'm working with executives and business leaders, but I will tell you that stress and resilience is definitely something that comes up in those coaching sessions. And understanding how your brain works, understanding what can erode your resilience, I think is one of those first steps too, about how do I get my arms around just a situation defeating me, versus me saying, wait a minute, here's some things I can do. The world presents us with situations that we also often can't control,
Mm-hmm.
but what are things that I can do so that I can actually be there for those people who need me?
Right.
And develop that resilience.
I know we work with a lot of authors, and I tend to see some that love deadlines. I happen to be one of those people. I can't, if I don't have a deadline, it's hard for me to prioritize. So I give myself deadlines. On the other hand, I have met a lot of writers and creatives who almost freeze when they see a deadline. You know, it becomes a panic
Absolutely.
situation.
Absolutely.
So, can we talk a little bit about those two opposites and perhaps address that? What is it? Fight, flight, and freeze. What is that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, our brains and how it operates has kept us alive for thousands of years. And while there aren't any saber-toothed tigers anymore, there are deadlines, as you've mentioned, and some
Metaphorical
people,
tigers. Yeah.
yeah, they're metaphorical. So what happens is the body perceives a threat, and it could be that deadline. It could be I need to turn my chapter into my editor, or whatever it is you need to do. And what will happen is our body does go into what's called the fear reaction, which is, are we preparing to fight, to flee, or maybe we freeze? So what's going on is a number of hormones or chemicals start flying in the body. People have heard about cortisol and testosterone and adrenaline. Well, that's getting our body ready to fight. And it impacts our sympathetic nervous system so that our muscles and everything gets ready as well. And it controls blood flow so that if you go into a stress reaction, you may find that you are getting cold hands, and that is because your body is preparing to fight or flee, in which case it's sending all of our blood directly to our core for our lungs and our heart, and it is not going out to the extremities as much. So yeah, your hands will get colder and all, but it's ready to move you to either fight or run like hell. But what is happening in the brain is the cortisol goes up to the brain and it slams shut the door between the limbic brain, or the ancient brain. Some people have heard it called a reptile brain. It's where the amygdala is. So if people hear about amygdala hijack, but it slams the door between that very ancient part of our brain, which was built to keep us alive and help us survive, to interacting with our executive brain, which is a newer part of the brain. The lovely thing is the limbic brain holds memory and our emotions. The upper brain contains memory as well. Part of it, and I don't want to make you all neuroscientists here, but part of the upper brain is the neocortex, and that contains memory too, but it contains the how-to. So if you get into a stress reaction, and for some of you, you may have been in a meeting and asked to speak up, and all of a sudden it's something you've done. You know the project, you know what you did, but for the life of you, you couldn't tell somebody to save your soul until you get up from the meeting, you walk out and suddenly go, I know how I did that.
Right.
Well, what happened was the doors reopened to your upper brain. So as a writer, what can happen is that deadline hits, you sever the connection between your upper brain, and now you're operating and making decisions out of your limbic brain, which are very emotionally based. And something that you were ready to write and you've lost, it's because it's up in the neocortex and you can't access it.
So how do we get that back?
That's the question, right? And we can. There are many ways to do it, and some of the simplest ways are get up and take a 20-minute walk. It helps to burn off cortisol. Some people love to go to the gym, they go running, but honestly, all it takes is a 20-minute walk to start burning some of it off. Some of us practice just simply breathing, just doing some deep breathing. Some people like to meditate. Some people use prayer. Any of those methodologies cause people to become very present. And when you're present, you're not reacting. And by being present, you actually help other chemicals, hormones in your body to start flowing. And those are the chemicals that reopen the doors between the limbic brain and your executive brain. And while that's important to you is because creativity sits up at the front in the prefrontal cortex, along with strategy, Boy, doing any kind of financial decisions, that
Hmm.
heavy duty logic and thinking, ethics sits there as well, loyalty. So, really important to open those up. So, I would just say for people who are feeling highly stressed, one of the things you want to do is to reduce that stress. And some of it is changing your own thinking, like the negative messages we're sending to each other, check that self talk. But some of it is get exercise, or maybe it's just sit still for a couple minutes and just simply breathe and focus in on taking a deep breath in, holding it for a second or two, and then letting it back out. Those are immediate things we can do. There are many others which would take far more of the time
Right.
than we have today to talk about.
And it sounds like you're really describing what an author or a writer might call writer's block, and that they're sitting there. The words yesterday came very quickly, very
Sure they did.
smoothly, and today they're not. And
Right.
quite often, it's simply just a matter of getting up, changing your environment, and doing something different. I don't know if this is the case, but for me, it's kind of a left brain, right brain thing. If I'm trying to do a highly creative thing, I've learned over the years, if I'm stuck, then I need to go do something physical, like walk the dog
Mm.
or take a walk around the block. And somehow it magically that reconnection comes back. Um,
It can be connecting with another person and just having a conversation.
mhm.
It's changing. It's taking the pressure off yourself to do it at that moment
Right.
and to change gears and to do that. And that can be true of many things we're doing, but for writers
Hmm.
particularly, if you need to access your creativity. The other methodology that many people is kind of like magic is prior to going to bed, they think about what is that issue that they're trying to solve. For some, they need to write it down on a pad of paper because it takes pressure and stress off them about forgetting it. Like when I get up in the morning, am I going to forget that I'm supposed to do this? So by writing it down, it kind of sets an intention. But then you go to bed and you get a good night's sleep, and your subconscious is working on it.
Hmm.
And sometimes, if you give yourself a day or two of getting a good night's sleep, and all of a sudden, might not be first thing when you wake up, but it could be shortly thereafter where all of a sudden something pops in your head, goes, oh, that's how
Right.
I need to do it, or that's where I need to go. And so using the subconscious to actually help you is amazing. And here's something I think is really important for people to understand around stress is that your brain needs 7 to 8 hours of sleep to cleanse itself of all of those chemicals that have been flying all day long.
Huh.
And if you get into the fear reaction, cortisol has a shelf life of 26 hours. So if you get triggered again during that 26-hour period, it extends it another 26 hours. And that's when you get people into the fear reaction cycle. And they are compromised. Their decision making is compromised because it's emotionally based.
Right.
And it's hard for them to break out of it, which means you're probably not getting a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep if you're in that kind of reaction because you've got the cortisol and the adrenaline just pumping through your body all the
Right.
time. So that's why it's really important to do some of those stress reduction exercises, whether it's you meditate, whether you take a walk, you do some retail therapy, you sit down with a friend and have a cup of coffee, you spend time with your loved one, your pet, whatever it might be. And if I have a cat jump in my lap, that will be my little
Right.
being to
It,
connect
it,
with me.
you will not have been the first that have had that on one of these calls. I do want to remind everybody quickly also, if you have a question for Nadine about any of this or something else, please type it into the chat and we'll make sure that we get to your question. I know, as I mentioned, we work with a lot of authors, and I know myself, I've seen where we tend to, as a writer, we tend to have an emotional connection to our words.
Mm.
And one of the dichotomies that we run across quite a bit on this side of the desk is we have more words than we need for a book, or more words than we need for a chapter if someone's submitting a single chapter. And what are some of the ways as an author that, I mean, it can be difficult for us to let go of those words and actually send it to an editor. So what are some of the ways, how can we help coach ourselves through that process of either hitting the send button or not taking things so personally if an editor does make a suggestion or a comment? Help us work through that process.
I experienced some of that myself, so I understand when people struggle with it. Let's circle back a little bit to the self-doubt. And that, what kind of messages are we sending ourselves? Is it, I'm reluctant to hand it off to my editor or to someone else because I don't think it's good enough? I didn't write what I really wanted to write. Whatever the message is I'm sending myself, is to check that and to maybe start sending some positive messages like, I've done the best I can with this draft, and think of it as a draft. It's not the final product. And why not? Because I can almost guarantee that through selective perception, you've not caught that you've left out a word. Because when you read your own manuscript, you automatically put it in, but a reader isn't going to see what isn't there, and a missing word could be in there. Or there may be an awkward sentence. You may know it's awkward, but you struggle and you haven't been able to fix it. That's what the friendly editor is for, is to really work with you, to help you to have the very best representation of yourself as a writer to show up. And so they're your partner and they're your champion because they want it to be the best it can be for you and to work at that. So I would say one thing is consider it a draft. It's not the finished product. And if it's a draft, it means we're going to keep working on it until we finally get it there. So some of it's, let's get in a mindset of it's not done yet. And it won't be perfect because I'm not perfect and I need someone else's eye. Because what I intend to say may not come across in the way I want it to. And someone else can give me that feedback so I have a chance to reword, rethink, reorder, whatever that might be.
Right.
I think another thing is what you mentioned is we don't really want someone else to tell us our baby is ugly.
Yeah.
And an editor is not there to tell you your baby's ugly. It's to look at what are steps we can take to strengthen whatever it is you've put together. And it could be they have some questions, or it could be some suggestions of reordering for understanding or whatever it might be. I would say one of the ways, if you really are struggling with this, is find someone you really trust, whether it's a friend or perhaps a colleague. And if you're writing a book, maybe you share a chapter. If you're writing a chapter, perhaps you share a few pages with that person to just get some initial reactions. Personally, when I was writing my chapter, I shared mine with my sister. She is a wise and very educated woman, and I know she has my best interests at heart. So I asked her to read my chapter. And it was in talking with her as the reader that it really helped me to determine how I wanted to end my chapter. And also, she ended up being a great cheerleader because I was writing about what happens in the brain when you are triggered and going into survival mode. How do you turn that from survival to thriving? And she was going through a bad patch with my brother-in-law. His health was pretty fragile there for a while. And she would say, you know, I've gone back and reread your chapter about 4 times now, and I've just found something new in it every time, and it's really been helpful for me. So that gave me some confidence to, you know, let's keep this going, and how do I really close it with some real value for that reader? Not just what what's happening with the stress reaction,
That's
but now
great
what do I
feedback.
do with it?
Well, and I like that word feedback because, there are different types of editors. And usually, the creative editor will come in and that's exactly what they do is they offer that feedback. And I always try and reassure the authors that, ultimately you are the author. And if there is a certain way you want a sentence to read, we will advise you a pro and a con. But ultimately, you make that final decision as to how that sentence, that paragraph, that chapter, that book is going to come across because your name is on it. And it's very important to us to make sure that we keep that author's voice intact because you're representing, or that chapter, that writing is representing you, and people know you, and you want them to get to know you and be authentic in that relationship. So it's important that perhaps to see the editor comments as feedback and suggestions. Now, ultimately, by the time we get to the proofreading stage, we'll want consistency and commas and apostrophes
sure.
and things like that. But from a content perspective, the ultimate decision is left up to the author. At least that's the way we work.
In fact, I would say I still caught something when we were getting close to the proofs.
Oh, yeah.
Or I caught something and went, oh my gosh, that's not correct. We need to change that wording.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, yeah, it's not done till it's done. It's drafts.
Yeah. It can become very much, I call it a Where's Waldo moment, in that we've all looked at it at least a dozen or half dozen times. And it just happens, becomes that little crack on the wall that you no longer see. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's suddenly a fresh perspective, and it's like, oh my God, and it pokes you right in the eye, and you're going, oh, I didn't catch this sooner, but gosh, I'm glad I'm catching it now. So we get it.
Well, and I think it's important also for writers to understand in the very first stages of your writing, it's a creative process.
Mm-hmm.
It just get the words out and get them on paper, and you can organize them later. The whole idea there is just to start writing, let it out on paper. Don't try and fix it as you're writing. That can always happen later. So do you have any final advice on how to stay confident, creative, and writing?
It's interesting. As we were talking about this session, I talked about the subconscious working for you, but sometimes the universe will provide something to you. And I ran into a quote by a woman named Gina Greenlee, and her comment was, at times, productivity means doing nothing at all. And so I think for some of us, we have to ruminate on things. We have to think about it for a while. Having been an English teacher and also being an author, before I start, I'm thinking about what I want to say or what do I want to accomplish by doing whatever it is. What do I want that reader to be able to take away, or the learner? And so I have to go back and say, okay, so what really are my objectives? What am I looking for something to have happen at the end? If I were writing a romance novel, it could be a great experience, for my reader to move through that adventure. But if it's technical, it could be I want them to be able to do some very specific things at the end. Thinking about that, but then thinking about what is it they need to know? What is some content that they actually need to know? Is there some facts or data I need to share in order to then build on it to be able to move on? And then if I'm looking at them being able to do something with what I've written, in the sense of my chapter was really about the neuroscience and the stress reaction and what's happening, but also what can you do about it in order to thrive, then what are the actions or the activities that that person can now do to employ some of what they might have learned earlier in the chapter. So I think some of it is really thinking about what is it that I want to accomplish by writing this? And it could be telling a great story, but it could be I want to teach something. The other thing I think is you have to know who you're writing for. Who is your audience? Is it parents? Is it other women? Is it business women? Is it just the reader in general? Who is it? Children. I'm a children's author. You know, who is it I'm really writing for? And thinking about what is it that that writer wants or needs. Why am I doing that? I think having been an English teacher, what you were saying is do a data dump. Just start writing. Don't worry about organizing it. Some of the best writers, like J.K. Rowling, she did an outline for every one of her novels. In fact, she did the full storyline for that set of novels that she was doing, where she knew point A to point B where she was going, and who were some of the characters she wanted to put in it. So I think some of it is okay to plan and start putting some of that down. And if you've got some great ideas for events you want in your writing, to plot them out.
Right. Yeah.
But
and there is no right or wrong there, if I could just interject, because we encounter that quite a bit when we do our anthologies, in that we'll have one person say, well, I work best if I just do a brain dump. And then the next person will say, but I need my outline. You know, I need to know the beginning, the middle, the end, and then I can fill it in. And either way is great, you know, whatever works best for you. And I know it's getting comfortable with your, as an author, when I say your, as an author, getting comfortable with their pattern and what works best for them. I noticed Kim Carr is on the call today. A wonderful writer, a wonderful photographer, a wonderful, what would you call it, angel of animals. And Kim, the stories that you weave through that I read on Facebook, I either laugh, I cry, or I do both, because they are just so, they come straight from your heart. And so you have your own way of writing it, but you have the ability to touch people as you write. And it's something that I look forward to. It's like, oh, what's Kim going to write about this week? So that's your way of doing it. It's just to let it flow from your heart. And if I could kind of wrap up the call with one other thought, I just wanted to share. It would be very easy for me to work 7 days a week, but I have become more aware of the fact that I need a couple days off, at least 2 days off at the end of the week or beginning of the week, whichever way you look at it. And so one of the projects I was working on, and I shared this with Nadine earlier, was that my 5.5-year-old grandson wanted a robe. Well, he wanted a special robe that had Ninja Turtles on it. And so in order to find that robe, you have to make it. And so I had made his brother a similar robe about 6 months ago. And so I had no pattern. I did it all just cut and paste kind of stuff, cut and stitch, so to speak. And I got about halfway through it last Saturday, and I couldn't figure out what the heck I had done in terms of, okay, now how do I finish it? How do I get this piece to fit into that? I had my daughter send me photos of the robe. I was trying to remember what I had made. And I had taken measurements, and I had written it all out and drawn it all out and thought I had my pattern in place, but there was, just one connective spot. It's like, how did I do this? So I just kind of walked away from it, went to bed that night, and in the middle of the night, it hit me. So whether it's writer's block or sewing block or whatever it is, it was that break of, get away, let it go. And it did. It came to me in the middle of the night. Oh yeah, that's how I did that. And I see that happen so often with our authors too, in that I don't know how to finish. I don't know how to wrap this up. I don't even know where to start sometimes. And it's, as you said earlier, Nadine, is, you plant that little seed, whether you write it on a pad of paper before you go to bed, or just think about it as you're going to sleep. And quite often that answer comes to you.
About so many things.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to just be writing. It could be, I've got a difficulty in a relationship, and you let it.
Right. Let it go long enough
percolate.
For the universe to give you the answer. Yeah. I greatly appreciate you being with us today. I loved our conversation.
Well, thank you.
We will have a follow-up email. Those authors who are used to being on our calls know that it comes out 24, 48 hours after this call. we'll have Nadine's contact information. Now, you mentioned that you also might have a gift for our author participants today. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I find many people are really intrigued by the chapter I wrote that was called Built to Survive and Thrive, and learning more about how does that fear reaction impact the brain, and then what can you do about it. So Cathy is going to send you, but in there will be a link to her library where you can access the PDF of that chapter. So I do offer that to you. And I am offering a half an hour pro bono session if you are interested in exploring perhaps some of your own writer's block or stress or resilient, or perhaps you are a executive or business leader and have an interest in something else, executive presence, or I don't know, communication skills, whatever that might be. And so I would make that offer, and through the information that Cathy is sending out, you will be able to contact me.
I love that. So I do want to thank everyone again for being with us. Be watching for our follow-up emails with the links. Our next webcast will be in January. In January, we're going to be starting a slightly different format. If you notice today, we're a little bit shorter. We didn't go the entire 45 minutes. I've been learning and hearing that shorter conversations get listened to more often. So we're just shortening our time with each broadcast. We'll also, beginning in January, start to broadcast live on Facebook simultaneously. So you'll want to tune in. The date, we are yet to decide on the date, but the date will be forthcoming. It will either be a Tuesday or a Thursday. There's some discussion about the preference for either, but we'll be sure and let you know. And we will be interviewing Jim Kornbleet, and our conversation will be about sales. One of the conversations, or one of the questions I get asked a lot from authors is, you know, how do I sell my book? I'm not a salesperson. I'm a writer. I'm a creative. I don't know anything about selling. So we'll be having a conversation with Jim about that. Thank you all for being here today, and have a happy holiday, whatever you celebrate, and we'll see you in January. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.